Wisdom shines in talks with Sri Ramana Maharshi. My comments bring this profound wisdom into your experience. Use YouTube's closed captions to read along. And this is talk 95. The same gentleman, Mr. Grant Duff, asked the master about the material relation between memory and will, and their relation to the mind. Maharshi said, they are functions of the mind. Okay. In answering Grant Duff, Ramana Maharshi says the mind, memory, and will are all functions of the ego. The ego, which has no independent existence, borrows, so to say, its knowing capacity from the consciousness, from the awareness that is the true self. The ego, or individual self, is an illusory entity that arises from ignorance and its ignorance of the true nature of the self. The ego is a construct that arises in consciousness and acts as an intermediary between what seems like an individual self and an apparently objective world. The mind, memory, and will are all functions of the ego. They're necessary for the ego to carry out its assumed role as the I that experiences the world and identifies with the body and thoughts that arise in the mind. When we say I, we point to our body. The mind is constantly creating and interpreting experiences. It interprets them based on the ego idea, the idea that I am an individual set off against and functioning in an external world. The ego and everything else in relation to these experiences. Memory helps the ego maintain a sense of continuity and identity and make decisions based on past experiences. Memory, though, can also be a source of suffering if it's used to cling to past experiences instead of being in the present moment. Memory can also be a source of fear, leading to aversion of the present moment. In either case, you're not being in the present moment. Will is the power of the ego to direct the mind towards a particular outcome. The will allows the ego to act as agent in the world, to make choices and to direct attention towards its desires and aspirations. Will can also be a source of suffering when it's focused on the ego's desires and objectives and is not aligned with your higher self. Advaita Vedanta teaches that the ego and the mind are not ultimate reality, but rather are relative and dependent on the true self for their existence. The ultimate reality is non-dual consciousness, consciousness that knows itself beyond time, space, and causation, which permeates the mind, and consciousness is the source of all experiences. The goal of Advaita Vedanta is the realization of the ultimate reality of the self as the self, transcending ego and mind. This is done using self-inquiry as a tool, reflecting on the nature of the self and questioning the ego's beliefs and assumptions about reality. Through self-inquiry, the ego can be seen to be unreal, then dissolve, and then realization comes. Knowing the ultimate reality of the self, you know it because you are it. Knowing and being are one. Knowing the self as the self by the self. Self-knowing consciousness. Ramana Maharshi tells us that the mind, memory, and will are all functions of the ego. However, ultimate reality is non-dual consciousness, and Advaita Vedanta is the transcending of the ego and the mind and the realization of the ultimate reality of the self. Through the practice of self-inquiry, you can dissolve the mind and realize the ultimate reality of the self. These videos help bring Ramana Maharshi's teachings into your direct experience. Subscribe now to help you deepen your understanding and practice to know the self. Just click the subscribe button.